thank you everyone for participating. We really do appreciate you taking your time to be able to spend a little bit of time learning more about APL64 and in particular how to create a Windows Runtime Executable, which I'm sure that eventually all of you will have to deal with at some point. So as stated, create a Windows Runtime Executable in APL64. Okay, one thing to note that the Windows Runtime Executable is something that can only be deployed on a Windows operating system. So therefore, it is not cross-platform. And also that Windows operating system must support .NET 8. And I bring this up because there are some alternative operating systems like Linux that do support Windows using Wine. Now, we do not know whether or not Wine supports .NET 8 fully. Okay, and I do know one of our users here actually has has some interest in that. Okay, moving on. Okay, basically the WR utility will create a single executable file containing your APL64 workspace and any files related to that. It will also package up the APL64 runtime components. Lastly, it would also include the .NET SDK Windows Runtime components. That's mostly the reason why the executable file itself is fairly large compared to what you used to be able to deploy with APL plus Win. In APL plus Win, it was simply just the APL plus Win workspaces and mainly just the APL plus Win runtime executable and any associated files that are related to that. Now, the benefits of being able to deploy the APL64 WRE in that manner is that it's a single, Okay, the benefit, as I said, is that it's a single executable file which contains everything that you need in order to run your APL64 application. So there are no additional downloads or installations required. For example, there's no need to install .NET 8 because everything is included. Second thing is that once the APL64 WRE is installed, you simply just install it and run it because it contains everything that it needs for it to run. And the last point I'd like to make is that the WRE runtime is royalty-free and perpetual runtime. So there's no additional fees associated with that. Okay, so as far as the minimum requirements to deploy runtime executable, you simply need your APL64 workspace. And just like in APL plus Win, the APL64 workspace must have a quad LX that starts the running of your main application function. And just like APL plus Win, the main application function must contain a GUI form which has a wait method on it. So those are the parallels with APL plus Win. Okay, now once you're in the WRE utility, there are a couple of fields that you're going to see, and we'll see an example of that later on. But typically in preparation for creating a WRE, you'll want to have your APL64 workspace. And unlike APL plus Win, you do not runtimize the workspace. It just takes your actual development workspace. That's all that's needed. So there's nothing special to be done with that. If your WRE application requires some additional workspaces or files, that would also be included. If you want to have an icon, there's actually a space in the utility to be able to specify the application icon. There's also an entry that allows you to include your XML format configuration file if and when necessary. Now, there's also, by default, it will actually pre-populate the APL now 32.adf, the APL now 32.exe manifest, and the APL now 32.ini. Now, The API.32.adf is necessary for any quad W calls that are made, or Win32 API calls. The API.32.exe.manifest is necessary for any of the quad W GUI interface. That will enable you to get the newer Windows style controls. And the API.32.ini really, for the most part, may not be necessary, but if your application currently now has one, you'll need to basically take that information and then incorporate it into the API.32.ini file. You also need to then create an output folder, which will then contain the WRE executable file that's created by the WRE utility. And upon completion of the WRE utility, the WRE executable file, you also get a utility log file that tells you the success or failure of the creation of the utility of the runtime executable file. Okay, so now what do you do in order to get into the WRE utility? It's just a matter of clicking on the options menu, create runtime.net assembly, followed by create Windows Runtime Executable. Once you've done that, this is the screen that you should see. Can everyone see the screen pretty clearly? Because I know there's a lot of stuff in the GUI.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Clear.
Excellent. Now, you'll note that there are some entries here that are marked with the star. Those are all required. So let's go over those. The first one, obviously, is your runtime. Well, basically, it's your workspace file name. And then use the browse button to be able to navigate to that. Now, the second required field will be the target folder. And as stated earlier, that's going to be the location where the WRE file will be created. The next entry, sorry about that. Okay, so the next entry will be the runtime executable name. That's going to be the exe file name that's going to be generated. You'll notice that there's an option already pre-selected that says same as the runtime workspace name. Also, jumping down to the assembly metadata field, you'll see that there's a copyright entry. That is pre-filled, but most likely you'll want to add some additional information like your company name and perhaps the year. Now, that's basically the minimum required information that is necessary to create a WRE file. And you also see that the ADF format configuration file and also the manifest file are already pre-populated with those files. So there's nothing that's required for you to do on that unless you want to specify an alternate location. And I will also just happen to mention in the middle of the executable content, you'll see that there's an entry for digital signature command. So if you want to digitally code sign your executable file, you have the option to do that there once you've enabled that field by selecting the digitally signed output checkbox. And now the rest of the information that you'll see down under the assembly metadata, for a full description of those, you'll want to refer to the full documentation for the WRE, and there's going to be a link for that later on in the presentation. But I encourage you to make sure that you review that document prior to going down the route of creating a Windows Runtime Executable. Okay, and some of this just kind of reiterates what I've already stated here. In the WRE utility, anything designated with an asterisk are required. And there's also if I go back to the previous screen, you'll see here in the middle section, This is where you would specify your additional workspaces, files, or any ActiveX components, etc. That's part of the application. Okay. Now, once you've created the WRE, actually prior to creating the WRE, you can then save the information from the WRE utility into a utility info file, and that will have the .wrtei file extension. And that simply allows you to then load it in the future to be able to recreate the runtime executable or make any modifications to it that you need. Okay. Now, just a little overview on the optional files required for the application area. For full descriptions, you can refer to the WRE documentation, but let me just describe briefly. If you take a look at the base target path, there are 3 options here. Okay, let me just briefly describe what they are. The executable path, that is going to be the same location where the executable file is created. Okay. Now the user path is going to be the writable area on your, I guess, wherever the Windows application is going to be installed that you have write access to. Sorry about that. That's normally going to have the C users, app data, your name, company name, and then some folder. Now, custom path could be any path designated on that end user's machine. Okay. Now, this is just a mock-up of one of the examples I have that I'll be demonstrating to you shortly. This is the My App example, which is actually included in the WRE documentation. Again, I'll refer to later on. But you'll see that I've got the workspace file name specified, described. I've got the location target folder, which is C, my demo, my app, runtime executable output. The executable name is my app. The configuration informations are all the same. They're already pre-populated. There is only one additional file that is required. And you'll see that it's got the source path and it's also got the target. It's also got the target path specified, which means that that's going to be the name of the file in the target location, and that's going to be in the user path. And some additional details under the assembly metadata. I've got a file description of my app, product name, my app, copyright, file version, company name. Now, what's going to happen is that some of this information will actually appear when you click on the properties for the runtime executable that's generated. Okay, so once you've got all the information in the WRE utility, when you click on the Create button, if it is successful, you'll get a dialog that looks like following. And it's going to tell you the name of the WRE file that was created. It will also tell you where the location of the output log file is going to be located. It will also tell you the location where the runtime executable file was created, along with the name. And obviously, if there's a failure, it will also indicate the failure and also tell you where the same log file is located at. Okay, so once the runtime executable file is created, you'll then want to use the Windows Explorer to navigate to that. Double-clicking on the WRE executable file to launch it. Now, this is something that users might be concerned with. Well, if the WRE file contains my workspace, and the workspace, say, isn't locked. Be rest assured that the runtime workspace is not materialized at runtime. It remains embedded in the WA executable file, so users cannot examine it. Okay, so it is protected. Now, if you then want to incorporate the WA executable file into, say, a third-party installation program, you're free to do so. Okay, so the very first example, in fact, this may have been the very first WA I did years ago. It was a clock example, and I think it's just on the APL Plus and Workspace as a clock example from there. And as is, I had to do nothing to it. I took the existing clock function and the show time function, saved it into the workspace, opened up the WA tool, referenced the workspace, and just created it. It was that simple. And when the clock example runs, this was the result. Okay, and for the next example, my app, this is included or described in the WA documentation. Now you'll see that the LXFN function on line 13 has a wait on it. That is very important that the runtime workspace has a runtime function has a wait on it. And just like an APL plus win, that is the case. Okay. So upon creating the MyApp utility, this is the result when the MyApp program is running. And there's some useful information here. This tells you, the first line tells you the location where the executable file was run from. The second line contains the user path. And that is the path that the application will have write access to. And then the current path is the current location where the executable file ran from. And this will also be demonstrated in real time as well. Okay, and the last example, I believe, is the APL, well, it's the APL 64 rel demo workspace. That function has Quad-LX set to open. And you'll see that there are a couple of changes that have been made to this open function from the original workspace in order for it to run in the WRE, to run as a WRE. First thing that you'll notice is that the location of the rel19.dll, I made it so that it runs where the workspace resides, but again, the workspace is never materialized. So the DLL will also be in that location. Let's see here, what else did I have to change? The EXE path, that also points to the rel19 DLL, which contains all the resources that are necessary in order for the rel demo to display the graphical elements. Let's see what else. Now, there is one thing that we are cheating here with, is that the APL grid is actually already installed and registered with APL 64. Now, if you were planning to distribute this on a machine that did not have the APL grid DLL installed, you will need to make sure that that is registered properly on the end user's machine. And obviously, on line 24, it generates the APL 64 form, APL 64 demo form, and then let's see here, it does a wait on it. That's what's required, obviously. And when it runs, you'll see that the APL64 demo appears. You can see that it correctly got reference to the APL64.dll because it's got the correct images appearing in the tabs. Now, a couple things here. When the APL64 WRE runs, one of the things that you will probably observe the very first time it runs, it's going to take some time for it to finally display the main application window. And the reason being is that the very first time it runs, it is actually installing the APL64 runtime components as well as the .NET SDK, the .NET 8 SDK in particular. All of that takes some time in order for that to get set up before it can then run the workspace, load the workspace, which will then display your form. Now that should only be on the very first time it runs. Subsequent runs of it should be pretty fast. I can't tell you how fast because your results may vary, but it should be very quick. And that is part of the reason why if you look at the location of the INI file and the ADF file here, I'm not sure if you guys are seeing my mouse, but you'll see that it's got this really long path. Okay? Because that's actually where the APL64 runtime components have been installed. And let me just actually show an example of that. We've got Windows Explorer here. Can everyone see the Explorer? Just nod your head. Good, awesome. Okay, so you'll see that, actually that's not what I wanted. Oh, that's a different location. Oh, that's the real demo, that's why. Sorry about that. Okay, never mind, let's just move on. Okay, so as I referenced a couple of times earlier, there is a full document that describes the WRE. To access that, you click on the Help menu, Developer Version GUI, followed by the Create Windows Runtime Executable. And upon doing that, you should get the following document to appear. Just bear with. Well, I'll display it in a second because I'm still running the script here. So let me just continue on. Question and comments. Okay, so let me just close this and just stop that for the time being. So this is actually the APL64 Windows Runtime Executable document. It should contain every information that you need in order to be successfully creating a Windows Runtime Executable. It's all online, and it's very detailed, and it goes over every aspect of the creating of a WRE as well as every bit of information describing every option that's in the WRE utility. Okay, so let me go ahead and demonstrate for you in real time a couple of examples I have for you. Okay, so this is APL64. Now this is the current production version that you all have, 2025.0.1. So let me start off by opening up the very first example, the clock example. It's got a quad LX set up. Unfortunately, this appeared on a different screen. That is what appeared. Okay. I can close this. I can click Options, Create Runtime Assembly, Create Windows Runtime Executable. This opened the WRE tool. And by default, as shown earlier, some information is missing. Now I'm going to go and load the WRE info that I've saved previously. You'll see that I've got the clock.wrtei. I'm going to open up that file, and you'll see that it's pre-populated some information. Obviously, the workspace, the output location. I've also entered some information about the file description, product name, copyright, and company name. I've also got a reference to the icon that's going to be associated with the runtime executable. So I then click create. Oh, okay. I was going to say that this was intentional because this is what you're going to see when you get the next update. Let me go and exit this. I'm going to exit this. Okay. Now I'm going to save the workspace. I'm going to go back, and by the way, watch what happens. I'm going to go back into the WRE tool. It's actually saved all the information I had previously, so you don't have to re-enter it again. Now, this only works while you're still in the APL 64 session. So anything that you did is not lost. So I'm going to say create again. Now it's doing its magic. Great. The WRE successfully created the clock.exe. It tells me where it's located. So I'm going to leave that up, open for the time being. Go back to Windows Explorer. Drag it over to the screen so you can see it. Go to my demo. Okay, this is in my demo clock folder. I'll go into the output, and you'll see that there's a clock.exe file that was created at 11:32 today. And if I take a look at the log file, my apologies, it's actually going to the other screen. This is information that's contained in the log file. Okay, and you can see that there is a clock icon that's associated with it. If I now click on the properties, some of that information that I did have is now contained under the details. File description, clock demo. That's the name I gave it. Product name is also clock demo. File version, that's the file version that I specified in the utility. You see that has a copyright notice. Okay. There's no digital signature. If I had applied a digital signature, this information would have also been embedded in the executable file. So let me close that. I'm going to double click on clock.exe and going to wait a little bit. Come on, come on. I'm waving my hands here. And this appeared. As I stated earlier, the reason why this took a little while for it to run or open is because it's deploying the APL 64 runtime and also the .NET 8. But let me close this, run it again, and boom, it came right up. Remember, it's just the very first time. It's going to take a little while. Okay, let me go to the second demo. Didn't really need to do, oh, actually I do want to do that. Okay, the second demo is going to be the RHEL demo. Upon loading that workspace, this is what appeared. Now, you'll notice that when it appeared, the same icons that you saw before are not showing up. That's because when the workspace was loaded, it did not find the DLLs, the rel19.dll. That's fine, because when you create the runtime, load, demo, rel demo, new rel demo. Okay, so in this view, you'll see that I've got the workspace file name. It's new APL64 rel demo. The output location is the rel demo /output. There's an ADF file, a manifest file. You also see that here there's a reference to the rel19.dll. There's also some information about the file description, copyright, version number, etc. And I'm just using the media.ico file as an icon for the executable file that's created. Now, I'm going to click on Create. APL64 is doing its magic. It quickly created the APL64 rel demo WRE file. Click on OK. I'll leave it open for the time being. I will go to Demo, rel demo, output. Okay, and you'll see that the rel demo executable was created 1136, which is correct. You see that it's got an icon, which is the media icon. Just a quick look at the properties. Look under the details. It's got the correct file description, product name, version number, copyright, etc. Now, I'm going to now double-click this to run it. Once again, it's the first time it's running, so it's going to take a little while for it to run. And now, voila. And unlike when it ran in the development system, you can now see all the icons on the tabs. And it runs just like it did, with the exception of the missing icons. It's also got a working grid, but again, it's got a working grid because the APL grid is installed on this machine. Okay. Now, at this point, I think that's pretty much the extent of my presentation. So Sonia, if you want to go ahead and, or Tisa, you might want to unmute everyone. This would be a great time for any questions or comments.